How the media lies.
Mr. Reagan.
Recently, NBC aired an episode of the show Meet the Press. The episode was called Alternative Facts, The Assault on Truth.
This Sunday, Alternative Facts, The Assault on Truth.
In this episode, Chuck Todd intended to explain to his audience how right-wing media and President Trump deceives conservatives. But in watching this episode, I realized that Chuck Todd and the journalists interviewed in the show broke down precisely the methods they use to lie to you. And now I'm going to break down their breakdown, because they do something very tricky. They explain how they lie to you, but instead of using examples of their own lies, they use examples from conservatives. But here's the tricky part. All of the examples they use are either things that Republicans have said that are true, or else they mischaracterize statements by Republicans. And most of these claims are, of course, about Donald Trump. And many of their claims about Donald Trump's so-called lies are merely disagreements. If Trump says something that the media disagrees with, they characterize his position as a lie. It's a bizarre thing with the left that I don't think they've ever really done before, at least not within my lifetime. This is a new tactic used specifically to attack the president and conservatives in the Trump era. But as the left is prone to do every time they do something nefarious, their accusation against conservatives lying is actually a projection of their own behavior. They lie, and then they point to conservatives and say, "You're lying." All right, now before I go any further, I have to sell you something. What is the American dream? To Bill O'Reilly, it's about living where you want, doing what you want, when you want, and also with whom you want. It's often been said that the best things in life are free, and that's true, but it's not the whole story. You can't reach your potential or live life to the fullest if you spend your days worrying about money. It allows you to do and be what you want, to support worthy causes, and to help those closest to you. It enables you to follow your dreams, to spend your life the way you choose. Money gives you dignity. It gives you choices. The prominent Fox News host has made millions investing over the years. And now he wants to share with you his secrets on how he does it. Watch the free presentation at wealthwithbill.com. That's wealthwithbill.com. And discover how Bill O'Reilly plans to help you achieve a 7-figure net worth. Lucky participants will also receive a free hardcover of Bill O'Reilly's new book entitled The United States of Trump. So enjoy. All right, we're back. Let's get into this. One of their favorite new methods of attack, their favorite new way to accuse conservatives of lying, is by using the words debunked conspiracy theory. I'm actually doing a different video on that, so I won't talk about it here. But basically, they will refer to any claim by Republicans that they disagree with as a debunked conspiracy theory. The Trump campaign being spied on by the FBI, conspiracy theory. Epstein didn't kill himself, conspiracy theory. Biden's quid pro quo in Ukraine, conspiracy theory. None of these are conspiracy theories, and they're certainly not debunked. But to those drinking the leftist Kool-Aid, everything the left-wing media says is gospel truth. And if they say it's a conspiracy theory, it must be a conspiracy theory. If they say it's debunked, well, it must be debunked. But let's get into the details of this. Let's look at the episode of Meet the Press and see how the left tries to convince their followers, the cult of the left. Let's see how they convince them that we on the right are all evil and corrupt.
The idea of fake news has become a growth industry, morphing from simply a get-rich-quick scheme in a former Yugoslav republic to a political weapon in our nationalized politics. The terms alternative facts and truth isn't truth debuted here on Meet the Press over the last couple of years, but these ideas are not new. Russia's government, for instance, now disorients its populace with so many versions of the truth, it creates what one former Russian TV producer called the fog of unknowability. Well, this morning we're going to hear from top players in journalism, diplomacy, and technology about combating truth manipulation and how Russian tactics have migrated right here to the United States.
Now, I'm not going to cover too much of this. They talk about this a lot in the episode, the idea that disinformation tactics have migrated from Russia to the United States. They talk about this a lot. But disinformations haven't migrated, Chuck Todd. They've always been here. This is what you're going to see throughout the show. Chuck Todd describes a phenomenon that he and other leftists in the media are participating in. But he characterizes it as a problem of the right, of Donald Trump. Indeed, spreading so much fake news will create a fog of unknowability in the populace, and that's exactly what you at NBC try to do. Now, Chuck Todd tries to link this to the Russians as if lying in the media was invented in Russia. No, Chuck Todd, American journalists have been lying to the public since the birth of the country. You pretend that your industry is a pillar of integrity. It isn't. If you were honest, I wouldn't have a job. Independent journalists and independent political analysts, such as myself, have surged in popularity because traditional so-called journalists have been caught misleading the public so often and so severely. You have no integrity, Chuck Todd. You're a huckster, and you're a propagandist for a left-wing political ideology. Todd consistently plays the clip of Kellyanne Conway saying that there are alternative facts, and Rudy Giuliani saying that truth is not truth.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods. Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like...
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
Chuck Todd uses these clips to support his claim that it's the political right wing that is trying to deceive the public. But the use of these clips in itself is a deception. Neither Kellyanne Conway nor Rudy Giuliani were trying to say that truth is not important or that lies are just as valid as the truth, which is what Chuck Todd wants you to believe that they're saying. When Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts, she was obviously saying that there are multiple perspectives and that you can sometimes disagree about the facts, which is universally accepted as true, as well as a totally reasonable idea to express. When Rudy Giuliani said truth isn't truth, he was also very clearly expressing the idea that there are two sides to every story. Kellyanne Conway used the example of saying the sky is partly sunny or the sky is partly cloudy. Both are true, but expressed in two very different ways. And that's what she meant by alternative facts. Giuliani used the example of a he said, she said. From an outside perspective, it's impossible to know which is the truth. Neither of these ideas about multiple perspectives is in any way denigration of the value of truth itself, or a denial of the existence of truth, or an advocation of deception as valid or reasonable. Chuck Todd's use of these clips to support his accusations against Republicans is the first of many deceptions in this very special episode of Meet the Press.
But the scale is new. As of December 10th, the president had made 15,413 false or misleading claims in office. That, according to the Washington Post.
Okay, this is something that the left loves to quote, the Washington Post's Trump lie tracker. But here's the thing. None of the so-called lies that the Washington Post uses in this tracker are lies at all. All right, so I'm just looking at the site right now, and under this graphic, it says most repeated claims. So I'm not cherry picking so-called lies that are particularly questionable or obviously wrong. These are what the Washington Post is themselves promoting as the most egregious lies posted on their website. And I'm reading these just, as they come up. All right. The great trade deal, one of the greatest trade deals ever made for our country. Okay, so Trump is speaking here about USMCA. This is clearly an opinion. It's an opinion that the people at the Washington Post disagree with, okay? And so they've labeled it as false or misleading. This is not false or misleading. Labeling it as false or misleading is in itself false and misleading, all right? You're false and misleading, Washington Post. You are false and misleading. This counter indicates to us just how deceptive the Washington Post is. They're actually doing us a favor. They're tracking their own deception. It's like they're saying, this is exactly how deceptive we are. All right, so the next one we've got on here, it says, I can't imagine they would vote for it because we did nothing wrong. There was absolutely nothing done wrong. All right, so Trump is talking about impeachment here, and it's not clear what the Washington Post thinks is false or misleading here. They're not clear in their explanatory section, but it is clear that this is a strongly debated point. I'm not going to get into all the evidence to support Trump's claim that he did nothing wrong, but he did nothing wrong. The left is protecting Joe Biden and the rest of the corrupt Democrats, so they claim that Donald Trump is corrupt. But even within the context of that debate, Trump's claim is contested at best. This cannot possibly be classified as a lie. All right, so the next Trump quote that is classified as a lie here. It was nothing to do with me. This has to do with the United States. The word was us. Can you do us a favor? Okay, so now Trump is talking about the phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, and this was not referring to the Biden thing at all anyway. It's about the Democrat servers being hijacked. And so the whole do us a favor thing, it's totally irrelevant. But because the leftist media keeps claiming that when Trump said, can you do us a favor, he was talking about the Biden thing, which is totally not true, the media, they want to reinforce this idea by arguing against Trump's very obvious clarification that he said, do us a favor and not do me a favor, as has been claimed by several on the left. But again, it's all irrelevant because he didn't say that about the Biden thing anyway. And even if he did say, do me a favor, that's just like a common expression. It's like saying, oh, and one more thing. Or, if you don't mind, or even just, hey, all of these phrases are just placeholders, right? They're turns of phrase that keep the speaker in control of the conversation for a moment while he formulates his next sentence, right? This is how human beings talk. The left wants to turn do us a favor into do me a favor and then move the placement of that phrase within the conversation in order to make it relevant to the Biden request and then apply a sinister meaning to it that it doesn't have. These are the mental gymnastics that the left will go through in order to make an innocent placeholder expression of Donald Trump into proof of corruption. It's pretty impressive, actually. It's like reading about a master criminal. It's horrifying, but it's impressive. Chuck Todd then goes on to criticize the scale of the attack on the mainstream media.
What's also new? The scale of the campaign against the press.
So Chuck Todd believes that the reason conservatives don't trust the mainstream media is because Trump and conservative news outlets, Newsmax, Breitbart, Daily Wire, Fox, etc., that these quote-unquote right-wing news outlets are so critical of left-wing media that it's brainwashing their viewership not to trust the left-wing media, like Meet the Press. Now, it couldn't possibly be that the mainstream media is constantly lying to the public. It couldn't possibly be that they have a clear left-wing bias and clearly hate President Donald Trump. It couldn't be that they're just pretending to be nonpartisan, neutral, objective observers of news. And it couldn't be any of that. I mean, give me a break. Everybody can see that you have a bias and that you have an agenda. Even leftists see it at this point. The only reason that the scale of the attacks on the mainstream media seem so great today is because the scale of the fake news propaganda being pumped out of the mainstream media has exploded. Of course, if you're constantly pushing deceptive stories at us, of course we're going to call you out more often on your deception. This is not some kind of premeditated attack on news media. This is a reaction to your deceptive propagandist tactics, Chuck Todd. So Chuck Todd moves into a breakdown of effective propaganda techniques. But remember, although this is presented as a criticism of right-wing, quote, fake news, as you're watching it, consider that this is precisely what is done by CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, BuzzFeed, NBC, ABC, CBS, Politico, the Huffington Post, and all the other left-wing media outlets. This is their strategies explained and then falsely applied to right-wing media.
4 things that disinformation actors do if they want to attack their enemies or defend themselves against criticism.
Number 1, dismiss. Attack critics to erode their credibility and invalidate the facts.
Now, Chuck Todd applies this to Trump, of course, but doesn't the mainstream media constantly attack Trump in order to erode his credibility and invalidate the facts? I remember when Trump said his campaign was being spied on during the 2016 election, every reporter, it seemed, laughed at him, literally laughed at him. Well, now we all know that that was true. The mainstream media constantly told us that Trump colluded with Russia to win the election, but we now know that it was Hillary who used a folder full of salacious lies collected from Ukraine in order to win the election. One might justifiably classify that as collusion with a corrupt foreign country. But I don't think any of the left-wing media outlets ever reported that angle, even though it was true. Trump calling out deception among the mainstream media is not a component of some imagined Trump propaganda scheme. It's a valid criticism of deceptive, unethical journalistic practices.
Number 2, distort. If the facts are against you, make up your own facts.
This is almost laughably applicable to Chuck Todd and the rest of the left-wing media. The Ukraine phone call that I mentioned before is a perfect example of this. Trump said, do us a favor with regard to the server as a turn of phrase. The left reported it as do me a favor, and they reported it as a meaningful indication of corruption relevant to the request for a Biden investigation. That's a perfect example of making up your own facts. There are so many examples of this in 2019. The whole Ukraine quid pro quo thing was a lie. Russian collusion was a big lie. The coverage of the Covington High School students, the coverage of Jussie Smollett. Walls don't work. Of course walls work, you muppets. Washington Post's lie tracker is in itself a big lie. Donald Trump is deeply racist. Republicans are deeply racist. All white Americans are deeply racist. Lie, lie, lie. AR-15s are a huge danger to the public. Abortion is fun and easy. Hashtag no regrets. And that climate change is an imminent, catastrophic threat to humanity and that the world will end in 12 years. And that's a very short list of the, quote, facts the mainstream media has made up because real facts are against them. And the most egregious lies, of course, are about racism and violent crime in America, but that's a topic for a whole other episode.
Number 3, distract. Whataboutism, or the I'm rubber, you're glue defense. If you're accused of something, accuse someone else of the same thing.
Well, this is a chicken and egg dilemma. Which came first? Accusations of Trump's deception or accusations of media deception? The truth is, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is who is telling the truth and who is lying. Of course, the deceptive party will accuse the honest party of lying because the two parties are claiming contradictory facts. The only really good way of deciphering who is the honest party and who is the deceptive party is to listen to both sides and then research the topic yourself a bit. And if you don't have time for that, there's a great trick that you can use that will indicate who is being honest and who is lying to you. Consider which party's telling you to listen to both sides and which party's telling you they're lying to you. Don't trust them. Don't even listen to them. They're just brainwashing you. Their ideas are dangerous. Only listen to us. We're honest. You can trust us. The party which tells you not to listen to the other side, they're probably the ones lying to you. And that is the simple common sense approach to separating honest news media from deceptive news media. You know, I'm not even going to give you my opinion on which side does which things. I'm just going to encourage you to listen to both sides and keep my little trick in mind. I think you'll very quickly recognize which party encourages you to listen to both sides and which party encourages you to listen just to them.
Number 4, dismay. Threats and intimidation.
Funnily, I have never heard the president threaten the media in any serious way ever. I know that they claim that he has, and this is actually the example that Chuck Todd uses.
We are going to take a strong look at our country's libel laws.
But if you're constantly egregiously lying about the president, I think you should be held accountable for that. But Trump has never prosecuted any journalists or their sources for any reason that I'm aware of at all. But you know who did? Barack Obama. Obama was notorious for prosecuting leakers in the federal government. He had one of the least transparent presidencies in living memory, despite promises to the contrary. And he weaponized the political system against many who leaked information to the press during his presidency. Some might call that an abuse of power. And recently, one congressman, Jeff Van Drew, switched parties over the impeachment debacle. And when he was asked about the specific moment that he decided to switch, Van Drew said that it was a threat by a prominent local Democrat in New Jersey.
I met with the chairman of Atlantic, the Democratic chairman of Atlantic.
Is that Mike Suleiman?
That is Michael, yes. And he said, I just want to let you know something. And I said, sure, and basically he said, you're going to vote for impeachment. And his point was that, well, if you don't do it, you're not going to get the line. And I think a lot of folks may or may not know what the line is, but it's the part of the ballot that you get where you're running with everybody that's part of the mainstream group. And he says, you're not going to get the line. In fact, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that you can't even run in Atlanta County or don't have any real opportunity. That was a real sign to me.
So, it's not the Republicans or Trump that's guilty of threats and intimidation. As far as I can tell, that's another left-wing tactic. So after presenting these 4 points of how propaganda works, essentially educating the public on how he himself and other Democrats in the media mislead their audience, after this, he brings on a couple of prominent journalists from the hard-left Washington Post and the New York Times, Martin Barron and Dean Baquet. So he brings these two journalists on to explain propaganda tactics in finer detail.
And joining me now is the executive editor of the Washington Post, Martin Barron, and the executive editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet.
I mean, our job, and it's a hard job, but our job, and I think our newsrooms have been sort of rebuilt to do this, is to very aggressively sort out fact from fiction, and to very aggressively work to make sure that people trust us?
No, it is not your job to make people trust you. It's your job to present the facts honestly to the public. The trust of the public will be gained if you are honest. If you are dishonest, your trust will be lost. Take a look at this survey from 2018. Fox is way up at the top. NBC is way down in the bottom half of the survey. Now, I don't know where the New York Times or the Washington Post would end up, but these papers have lost much of their public trust in recent years. And listen, the priority of journalists should not be gaining trust. It should be telling the truth. The public trust should be a result of journalistic integrity. And this is a big problem with left-wing media. They have the wrong priorities. They're considering things backwards. If your priority is accurate, impartial journalism, that indicates to me that you're a trustworthy news organization. But if your priority is gaining the public trust, well, that's an indication that you really just want people to believe what you're telling them, whether it's true or not. To me, this is the definition of an unethical, untrustworthy news organization. At one point in the episode, Chuck Todd uses a letter to the editor of the Lexington Herald-Leader in a question to the journalists. This, to me, is a clear illustration of the extreme anti-Christian bias of the media. Chuck Todd, it seems to me, doesn't even realize how unbelievably bigoted this letter is. Here's the clip.
I want to read you guys a letter to the editor that we found in the Lexington Herald-Leader. It was a fascinating attempt at trying to explain why some people support President Trump. Here's what he says. Why do good people support Trump? It's because people have been trained from childhood to believe in fairy tales. This set their minds up to accept things that make them feel good. The more fairy tales and lies he tells, the better they feel. Show me a person who believes in Noah's Ark, and I will show you a Trump voter. Look, this gets at something, Dean, that my executive producer likes to say is, hey, voters want to be lied to sometimes. They don't always love being told hard truths.
Basically, he's saying that Trump voters are Christians and that Christians are morons who believe in fairy tales. Well, that is just charming. And this is the basis of Chuck Todd's question. Now, to Dean Baquet's credit, he rejects Chuck Todd's assertion.
You know, I'm not quite sure I buy that. I'm not convinced that people want to be lied to.
Chuck Todd then goes on to break down what he calls the anatomy of a lie, and he brings on a hard left-winger, an anti-Trump guy, Clint Watts. If you want evidence of my claim about his political feelings, please feel free to check out his Twitter feed. It's chock full of links to anti-Trump articles. Anyway, this is the Chuck Todd Meet the Press NBC breakdown of how one effectively lies to the public.
Clint Watts is a security analyst and the author of Messing with the Enemy, and he's going to help us understand how unfounded allegations like this spread. Clint, good to see you, sir.
What we saw in the first part was you take a fact and use a fact to propel the lie. This is essentially how you make that falsehood move to where you want it to be. So if you want to propel your lie, just keep issuing falsehoods. The truth has one voice, but lies are infinite. You can continue to make more and more lies, which then wears out anybody trying to rebut them. There are 4 attributes you look for in terms of spreading some sort of propaganda. 1, be there first. 2, repeat it over and over and over again. The human mind actually can't resist repetition. 3, it's got to come from a trusted source. These are trusted sources for certain audiences. Yeah. And then block out all rebuttals. And so if you can narrow people in, if you can say these are fake news and these are not, you can put people in an information cocoon that they can't escape from. You can make lies faster than you can refute them. And so if you're a propagandist, you know that. Just continue to ask questions, question more. Also, the motto of a certain Russian state-sponsored outlet is exhaust the audience with so many possibilities you can't know the truth, and the audience will walk away.
Huh. So that's what you do, NBC. Interesting. You know, this reminds me of the Russian collusion reporting. The kernel of truth was that the Russians were distributing ads online that seemed to try to help Donald Trump in the election. Now, some of these ads were pro-Hillary, and many of them were clearly attempts just to outrage and divide the American public. But enough of them were deemed, quote, helpful to Trump that the press felt that they could convincingly characterize the Russians as pro-Trump. Though I don't think the Russians were ever really pro-Trump at all. But this small kernel of truth was then used to propel the lie that Trump colluded with Russia in order to corruptly steal the election from Hillary Clinton. This is a lie that many, many, many people on the left still believe to this day, even though we all know that this was never true. But before the Mueller report finally proved that, all of the networks and all the left-wing media outlets constantly issued falsehoods in order to propel their lie, as Clint Watts puts it. This whole episode of Meet the Press is so amazing to me. They've essentially produced a play-by-play handbook of the deception techniques that they, the mainstream media, used in order to deceive their viewers. I actually find it astonishing that they ever produced this at all, but I guess they were confident that their detailed explanations of propaganda techniques would be accepted as a purely right-wing problem and that their viewers wouldn't recognize that it was actually their own tactics being described. Chuck Todd ends the episode with a panel of hard left-wingers. The only conservative is Matthew Continetti, the son-in-law of prominent never-Trumper Bill Kristol. The panel segment is some of the most biased and absurd stuff in the whole episode. Let's watch a bit of it now.
I think one of the issues that I have with the way we're fighting back against this is we're trying to fight back with information, but journalists are not in the information business. We are in the trust business. Trust is an emotion.
Okay, so this guy is Joshua Johnson, formerly a host on NPR. And what he's saying here is really revealing. It really supports what Dean Baquet said earlier in the show. He says, journalists are not in the information business, we're in the trust business. You're not in the information business. That's basically like saying facts don't matter.
I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
This is a reoccurring theme with leftists, it seems. It's more important to them that you believe them than that they accept truth or facts or information. Truth, facts, information, maybe these things matter a little, but not as much as their ability to get you to trust them. And that's a very dangerous philosophy for a journalist or a politician. Again, they've got a backwards strategy. We should just believe you because you seem trustworthy and then hope that you're telling us the truth. No. You need to prove that you're trustworthy by consistently telling us the truth. The problem that the left-wing media has right now is not that conservatives are being gaslighted by conservative media or Trump or the Russians or whatever. The problem that the left-wing media has right now is that the public is too well-informed. We can research these issues ourselves and we can find out the truth. Their main problem is that their lies are no longer as effective as they once were. The internet too easily provides us with access to information. We don't just accept what you say uncritically. Sorry, not sorry. But this is exactly what this guy says he wants. He wants the public to stop questioning his reporting. His contention is that journalists are always honest and they're always right about everything. And so the public should just trust them. And so journalists should focus on marketing themselves as trustworthy, because how can you focus on being more honest when you are already 100% honest? But either this guy is delusional or he's straight up lying. Now, I don't think all left-wing journalists intentionally mislead the American public, but the ones who are trying to be honest, they've all been misled themselves. If a leftist genuinely believes the leftist ideology benefits the American people, then they sadly believe a lot of the propaganda that's being spread by their colleagues. That's certainly less sinister, but perhaps more sad. Now, this next part is actually the most bizarre part of the entire episode. The so-called conservative on the show, Matthew Continetti, basically calls conservatives morons who believe absurd tabloid nonsense. And then the leftist NPR host defends conservatives by rejecting that characterization and saying, no, the Christian values of conservatives demand that they value truth. But then he offers his own explanation as to why conservatives don't accept left-wing news. He says that conservatives are just too lazy to do their own research. Here, watch this.
The distrust of institutions that's long-standing among conservatives has led many of them to no longer believe in the idea that you need kind of evidence in order to forward a fact, or they don't believe in certain verified sources, credentialed sources of evidence or information. They don't trust any of it. One other change that I think it makes all of this more difficult is it used to be you can go to the supermarket and you see the tabloids and you see the Weekly World News and the alien has predicted who's going to be the president this year, and you move past it. Right. Maybe some people get a chuckle, maybe some people believe it, but it's a minority of the population. Today, you can't ignore it because it's everywhere. And the second you go on one of these platforms, social media in particular, you're confronted by it.
I still think, though, I hear you in terms of the distrust among conservatives of institutions. You're right about that. I do, however, know a lot of conservatives who are God-fearing people and who remember that the Bible says that it's better to tie a millstone around your neck than to lead one of my little ones astray. They know that Bible verse that says, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. They've read the book of Proverbs, and they know the first 2 chapters are all about the value of truth and wisdom. So I think that there's a part in conservatism that speaks to the value of truth and the necessity of personal responsibility. I think it is crazy that there are people who say, oh, it's just too hard. There's so much going on out there. There's so much information. Yes. We won a world war against the Nazis where we invented a new bomb and planted victory gardens and put women in factories. And you mean to tell me you won't subscribe to your local paper? Really? Is this too hard?
I know a lot of conservatives, and the vast majority are skeptical and think critically about all the news that they get, whether it be from Newsmax or the New York Times. Just yesterday, my father sent me a long text explaining how angry he was about Tucker Carlson. Look, we don't have to agree with each other all the time on the right. And I don't think most of us do, and I think that's healthy. We should have our differences and be able to discuss them rationally. In my experience, conservatives tend to be independent thinkers who expose themselves to a variety of media sources from both sides of the political spectrum. Now, I do know a few conservatives who believe the crazy conspiratorial stuff, but the truth is there is far more of that on the left, and the left distributes much more of the fake news conspiracy stuff through their mainstream outlets. While conservatives might get a sketchy story from 8chan or InfoWars or something like that, the left is getting sketchy stories from MSNBC and CNN. These are supposed to be legitimate news outlets, but they have people like Rachel Maddow and Don Lemon outright lying to their viewers on a daily basis. Trump won the election fair and square? No. According to CNN and MSNBC, Trump stole the election through colluding with Russians. A group of Covington High School students were being harassed by a group of Native Americans and Black Israelites? Not according to CNN and MSNBC. Those boys were wearing Trump hats. Clearly, they were the aggressors, proof that Trump supporters are evil racists. And it goes on like this, day after day after day. Orange man bad, white people bad, Christians bad, men bad, and a million lies to support these absurdly false claims. Well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Good night.
Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution of peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.